So what I'm going to talk about today is a very deep subject. I've spoken, bits and pieces, but I've never, I don't think I've ever really attacked a subject specifically and clearly, very clearly. But it's a very important subject. It's one of the deepest concepts in all of Ashkafa. It's something which is fundamentally unknown, really, to people. And it really is what truly separates us from God. It's probably the concept which most separates from God, gives us complete inability to understand who God is. Not that with the concept we understand who God is in a more clearer way. It's not so, because ultimately we cannot really understand who God is, but we do have a nearer approach. You know what I mean? So one of the ways that we understand God, the way we understand God now, is that we understand not what he is, but what he's not. So we keep on defining ourselves, the zulasoi, and what we are, and we realize that whatever we possess, he does not possess. So we have a clearer understanding of who God is by what he's not. And that's what the Rambam says. And, 100% it seems to be true that we understand God through a negative definition. So the question is, it's not only God. The reason why we really don't understand God is a shocking fact. It's because we don't really understand who we are, the Zulosoi. That's right, people think that they understand who we are. They understand the biology of a person, the chemistry of a person, the physics of a person, and you have a certain sense, and the psychology of a person, and you have a certain sense that you feel you have an idea who you are. But that's completely untrue. We really have no concept of what we are, what kind of entity we are, and that we are in certain ways much closer to God, to his type of an entity, than we are to the universe. That's right. We are a real hybrid. The universe is composed of objects, and we are therefore, in a certain sense, we think that we are an object, and we see ourselves as an object. The same way we study the universe in terms of the sciences, we say the same way we study ourselves. In fact, we really reduced ourselves to most of the similar entities of the universe. We are really objects that went through, to some degree, the laws of evolution. The laws of evolution really make us a complete object, and even talks about human beings as if they were objects, animals, that we were descended from animals, and those animals are descended, from plants or something else, and then finally going back to one-celled organisms and so on. So we see ourselves as having evolved in some way from really the animal world and even worse than that. And of course, finally, going back to the inanimate world, the world what's called in Hebrew domem. But this is a complete distortion of what a human being is. And because we are in such a state of this distortion, we have no concept, not only who we are, we have no concept who God is. So I'm going to give this lecture today, which will completely reverse this pattern and define who we are really, and then suddenly we will find ourselves in a different position, that we will have suddenly a clear idea somewhat who God is. And answer the most fundamental question of the universe: where did everything come from? Where did God come from? And why is it that he exists and was never created? So we'll have some way to answer that on a certain level. So fundamentally, the way the philosophers and scientists, especially philosophers, see man, is that man as fundamentally the being of all objects. And the fundamental components of objects is what's called essence and existence. And I've spoken about this before, and I will have to mention this again. Essence is what a thing is. An essence is a definition. When you want to know what a certain item is or a certain object is, you give it a definition. And the definition points to certain features or characteristics which really comprise the essential aspect of what it is. In other words, without these characteristics, this item would not be an item. For example, a human being is defined as a rational animal. And these are the fundamental things. He's similar to the definition of an animal, but he has the additional component of being rational, having an intellect. Okay, that's his definition. And what a definition means is that if he doesn't possess these characteristics, he will not be that item. And that's what the essence is. In Hebrew, the word essence is mahus, from the word mahu. And it's interesting that the word essence, the Hebrew word mahus, doesn't appear until medieval times. I don't believe that in any of biblical Hebrew there's such a word as mahus, which means the essence of an item. And that's an interesting question, that Chazal didn't seem to concern themselves too much with the essence of something in that way. So I don't know. I don't understand clearly why the word essence wasn't defined before. But in biblical Hebrew, the word essence is usually given by the word etzem, atzmus, and that's why we refer to the essence of God. We say atzmusai, as if God had an essence. But the closest we get to God with an essence is the word atzmusai. But a new word existed in Hebrew called mahus, which is from medieval Hebrew, and so on, and fundamentally appeared, I think, with the Mechurim, with the philosophers in Hebrew. In any case, an essence is a definition, and a definition describes the fundamental characteristics, not what an object possesses so much, but the fundamental characteristics that without these characteristics, it would fail to be this object. So therefore, these characteristics of an essence are called the essential characteristics. Now, objects, all things in the universe, also have other characteristics besides the essential ones. These are characteristics which are attached to the item and help us understand it, but it's not part of the essence, so that if it's missing, it does not detract from it being the item. So these two characteristics, essence is one, it describes what a thing is. But there is also another fact about everything which exists in the universe, is what? Is that it possesses existence. What does that mean? That means it's in a state of being. It participates in the process called existence. Now, what's the definition of the word existence? Well, there's no real definition of it. A synonym of the word existence is being. So when you participate in the process of being, you participate in the process of existence. But there's no real definition for it, because it's the most abstract term in the whole dictionary, existence. You see it? And it cannot be defined, because we really can understand what existence is as a part. Because in a definition, what we do, we see this object is a part of which class, which category, you see? And the second part of a definition is, how does the object differ from every other object in that class? So everything is defined by who it's like and how it's different. That constitutes the definition of what it is. So a human being is part of the higher class, the higher category called living things, or by the class called an animal. A human being is similar to an animal in the fact that it's alive. It submits to the definition of being alive. But in addition to being alive, an animal has what's called sensory perception. It's able to not only experience reality, but it actually senses reality in a certain way. So a plant, because it's alive, can experience reality in a way. In other words, it responds proactively to different stimuli in reality. Whereas an inanimate object cannot proact It reacts. It reacts to reality. In other words, the inanimate object, which is not alive, remains in the same position that it is before. It does not change or move. The only thing that gets it to change or move is when reality affects it. You see, therefore what we say is an inanimate object reacts to reality. But a living thing doesn't react to reality only. It's not only affected by reality, but it also proacts. It moves in reality by itself based on certain internal living impulses. And it's able to formulate a movement by itself without any recourse to reality. Okay, so a human being is part of the category called an animal because he has senses which is able to not only experience reality, that which is out there, outside, but he's able to experience it. A human being is able to detect reality. It's not simple, it actually detects, and he feels the perception. He has a perception of reality, and so on. But therefore, he's part of the class called animal, but he's different than an animal. How? He's rational. An animal is not said to have an intellect. It has a kind of mind, which is based on reality, but it doesn't have the mind of a human. Although some scientists would like to give it that definition, but it does not have an intellect. It can't really conceive of something. It can't form a concept the way a human can form a concept. In any case, but the human does exist. So therefore, there's two concepts which merge together in our world. Every item has an essence which tells us what it is, and every item also exists which tells us that it is. The existence of an item is the fact that it participates in a process called being. Okay, and we all understand what being is. It means that in some way the item is here. The opposite of being is non-being, where suddenly the item completely disappears. Now, we really cannot define non-being. There's no understanding of what it means not to exist. Simply that we no longer can see it or record it in existence at all. We define non-existence by asserting existence and then negating the existence. So we say when something exists, we use the word is. It is. And we say if something doesn't exist, we do not have a specific word or a verb that characterizes that state. But instead we say, well, it's ising, and it's the fact that it is negated, so therefore it isn't. So when we talk about non-being, we first use the word being, and then we negate that being by another word, where the is not. But we don't have a word for non-existence. Why is that? Because we cannot comprehend what it means not to exist. Where does an item go? What does it mean that it doesn't exist? The concept is too abstract. But in any case, the notion of essence and existence are two separate concepts which merge. And when they merge, therefore, an item which has a definition suddenly exists. It's in a state of being. Now, when we use this kind of language and this terminology to describe the existence of everything, how do we use this terminology to describe the existence of God? Because God is a separate being. Wow. What is the one feature that God has that nothing in existence possesses? Absolutely nothing. And that is the reason why God is God. What makes God so powerful, even though he's greater than us in all qualities? Why is he so powerful? Simply because he has no origin. He was never created. He was never made. He was always here. So how do philosophers describe that kind of existence? Well, the Rambam says, for example, that type of existence is dissimilar to us. When we exist as an essence. These are two concepts that refer to our existence. But God does not exist as an essence, and he does not have existence in the normal way. How is that? How is he different? Because his essence is existence. In other words, if existence is a certain process, if you participate in it, you exist. If you don't participate in it, you don't exist. So let's say existence is a process. So in terms of existence, everything which has an origin was given its existence. In other words, it was given an essence, but that essence did not exist. But suddenly that object or that item, no matter what it is, an animal, a human, a planet, a star, a galaxy, any item which exists participates in the process of existence. And these two processes, essence and existence, merge together in a certain sense. And by creating a union of the two, not a real union, but a merger of the two, the object is said to exist. God, however, since he has no origin, right? He has no origin whatsoever, was never given existence. So therefore, where did he get it? Why doesn't God have an origin? So what the Rambam says, and what all the Mechel, the fathers, and Kabbalists, the way they understand it really, is God wasn't given existence because he is existence. In other words, the existence that we have, we possess. We possess existence like we possess a feature or a characteristic or a quality. But it's given to us and suddenly we exist. But God does not possess existence. What does that mean? Because he was never given it, he cannot possess it. So how does he relate to existence? He is it. Simply put, God is the process of existence itself. And what does that mean? That he is the process of existence? We don't know. We have never met such a being. We don't even know what such a being is. What does that mean? That the essence of it, that part of what God is existence. He is the quality of existence as a feature, as an essential feature. Now, we don't know what that means. We've never seen anything like that. But we know that that's what it is in Hebrew, because the name of God in Hebrew is the Shem Havaya, the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey. And where does this come from? This comes from the verb lihios, or to be. So the name of God is the verb to be. So that seems to tell us that God simply exists because he is existence. He is whatever existence is. He is that. And that's part of his essence. So since he is that, he must contain that feature. The feature is not given to him. It's not given to him from the outside. So therefore he has an origin, but he is that process itself. So therefore, if you are that process, then you must exist. So that's what they say. That's what they say about God. God is really the process of existence itself. He has no origin. He was always there. And that's what makes him so unique and so powerful. That's why God is in absolute control. Because our existence can be removed as well as given to us. We never are our existence. We are not. We never become identical with the existence that's part of our essence. It is always a state of giving of possession. It's given to us by something which is outside of our essence. So therefore, in a certain way, existence is a process which is given to us like a mortgage. But the mortgage is eternal. We will always be in the mortgage and the debt of the one who gave us existence, because we will never own it. We will possess it as a form of ownership, but we will never truly own it because we will never be it. So that gives us a better understanding of who God is. But does it really, we have defined God in terms of ourselves. Since we are a combination of existence and essence, God is also composed of existence and essence, except existence is not part of our essence. So therefore, we do not have to possess it, and if we don't possess it, we don't exist. But existence is part of God's essence. Therefore, he must exist, and therefore he has no origin. Now, the question is that we suddenly have to ask after this, what determined the fact that God doesn't have existence, but he is existence. Where did that come from? And not only that, why is he the only one that is existence and we are not? I mean, we still really don't understand who he is. First of all, we don't understand who he is, but we don't understand how he came to have the condition that he has. Since he is existence itself, how did that happen? You know, because we see in our universe two states. You either exist or you don't exist. And when you don't exist, that existence must be given to you because you don't possess it. You don't know. It's not you. So therefore, it must have come from outside of you. So therefore, we say that we all have creators. You know, we've all been created. But since God is existence itself, he was never created. So the question really is, well, that's strange. I mean, how did this come to be? How does it come to be that suddenly there's an entity who always existed? He's out in a certain sense beyond time. You know, he always was here. He is here now, and he always will be here. So in a certain sense, God is somewhat outside of time, or God is really in a total time. But the question really is, well, how did that happen? How does he possess that? I mean, how is he identical with his existence? And that has no answer. But what I'm going to do today, I'm going to talk about existence as a completely different item. And suddenly we will have somewhat of an answer. We can begin to understand where God came from. Okay. In a certain sense, because he actually didn't come from anywhere. But how is it that he has existence as an essence? So the closest that a philosopher is able to, let's say the Rambam, is able to define God as a combination of essence and existence where the two are the same thing. So the Rambam has to use our language, the language of Aristotle actually, the language of philosophy in a certain sense, that's who he is. But God is imprisoned, the Rambam is in a certain sense imprisoned in our language and so on. Now, there's a certain quality that exists, and we see it exists. We all have it. In fact, we humans are the only things in existence that really possess it the way we do. And it's somewhat of a problem. It doesn't really make sense. We don't really even know what it is. We all know we have it. We all know that to have it is to be human in a certain sense. But we really do not understand what it is. We do not even understand biologically where it comes from. And that's the event called consciousness. That's besides the fact that we all have a body, and clearly we see what each organ, we are a body composed of organs and so on, and we are an organism, we understand that. But the concept of mind, the concept of consciousness is really not understood. And what scientists have been trying to do is give it a definition, and they have completely failed. They don't know what it is. They have an idea that somehow consciousness is located in the brain. But how the brain produces consciousness is absolutely unknown. That such a small organ, relatively, can produce such an incredible thing called consciousness, called being. Because what is consciousness? In consciousness, when we're conscious, exactly what are we doing? So first of all, we know that our consciousness basically is rooted in our senses. When we see something or a trace of something, we can become conscious of it. We also know that we're conscious of things which we cannot see and are not part of our senses. So where is this conscious mind? And the thing is, it exists in the mind. What is the mind? Nobody knows. But every human being possesses it. So he possesses a mind, which really is like a camera. The mind is like a camera. How? In the sense that the mind takes a picture of every object that we see or every object that we detect through our senses. Every object we can detect through senses and some we cannot. But what does it mean that we detect it with our senses? We form a picture or an image in the mind. So sight, what is sight? What is a vision? Where is the vision? Is the vision outside of us? Does the vision belong to the object that we see? And the answer is no. The vision does not belong to the object we see, but the vision or the sight is about the object that we see. But where is that sight? That sight is in the mind. It's not outside of our heads. As much as it doesn't appear, when we're brought up through our aging, we see things all the time. We have a total, constant sense of vision, unless we're dreaming, and even dreams are visions. And where are these visions? Where is the sight? This sight is an aspect of our mind. It's an image in our brain. Not only is sight an aspect of our brain, sound also. It's an aspect of our brain. When we hear something, is that hearing part of reality? Is it outside of us? No, the hearing is not. The sensation of hearing is in our mind. It's an image that our mind forms of the sense called hearing. Same thing with tasting. When you taste something, where is that taste? Is that taste in the food itself? Not really. It's in our mind. You see it. Touching. Where is touching? It's in our mind. Smelling. Where is the odor? In our mind. So therefore, all five senses are really in our mind. So it's really an image that our brain forms from the brain, but in our mind itself. Where is our mind? We have no idea. What is our mind? We have no idea. But we know that sensation is nothing more than producing images of reality, which we don't know. In other words, when we realize that the way we know things, the way we see anything outside of us is through our five senses, and that these senses produce images in our mind, we realize an amazing thing. We will never know what reality looks like. In other words, it's a strange concept. When you see another person, let's say you see your brother, that's a sight. Where is that sight? Where is the picture of that brother? It's in your head. So the question is, what is your brother really like? What is he like without using a sensation to capture him? And the answer is, we will never know. Because we have to use our senses to know things. And the only things we know in our senses are images of these things in our mind. So therefore, who your brother and what exactly is his existence? How is he manifest? We will never know. We will only know the image that our mind tells us is of him, nothing more. And the same with all five senses. So what we see is a strange thing. How do we relate to reality? We relate to reality in the sense of what? Through images. We never relate to reality through a direct experience. Some people who believed in that, who understood this, were called the philosophers, were called the idealists. And idealists believe that there really is no reality. Since reality is only represented in our mind as an image, there is no real reality, or you can't prove that there's a reality. But obviously, in a certain sense, we know there is a reality, although we will never be able to identify it, because it's only an image in our minds. But we know that it is. So therefore, there's something called objectivity. There's something that exists outside of us, and that's what objectivity means. Now, how do they reconcile consciousness? When we're having a dream, where is that image that's in our dream? It's in our mind, fine, and we are relating to it, but it's not real. And even the image that we see of something which is real is not real. It's only an image. So how do we reconcile the concept of mind or consciousness? The truth is we don't. And what we have to do is we have to separate them. We have to say that there's a world of mind, right, that produces images, and that's the representation of reality. And then there's the world of what? Of reality. What is that? We don't know. What are objects really like? We don't know. What is the truth of reality? We don't know. We have to discover it. So therefore, they've separated. So a philosopher like Descartes fundamentally said there's two worlds. There's the world of mind, the world of the representation of something called reality, and then there's the world of reality. What is that like? We really don't know. We only can interpret reality by interpreting our sensations and our concepts. They only exist in our mind. So this idea of consciousness is a very strange idea. The fact that we have to know reality by being conscious of it is a very strange idea. Where does consciousness fit? You see it. The actual problem is what is consciousness and where does it fit? Now, if you really think about it, when you think about consciousness and the mind, suddenly you discover a new thought that I believe I have somewhat discovered, and therefore what I say is that there are really two objects in the world. Because when you have a sensation and you're looking at something and you are focusing on the image, what else do you have? In other words, what I'm saying is this: when you have a sensory experience of something in reality, and therefore it's called an objective experience. Could you please shut your phones? When you are focused on a sensation, a sight, a sound, a touching, whatever it is, a tactile sensation, whatever that sense is, you're also having at the same time another sensation. But this is not a sensation of reality. What is this? This is a sensation of you. In other words, behind every sense experience, there's the concept of me. Me, the word represented by the word me. You know that while you're having that sensation, you're also having a sensation which is in the mind. It's really a knowledge. You're having a knowledge that you're the one who's having this sensation. So you have the idea of me. So that's called a subjective sensation. It's a sensation not of an object in reality, but a sensation of the one who's producing the reality, who is reflecting reality as some kind of image. And that person is you, me. So therefore, consciousness applies to two separate things. It applies to the consciousness of what's out there, objective reality, but it also applies to what's in there. You have a certain sense of your mind that's seeing reality. So there are two things, and that's called subjective reality. So consciousness applies to two things: the sense of yourself and the sense of yourself being in an operation called the sensation of reality. You notice two things when you see something. You notice that you're seeing something out there as an image, but you also notice that you're the person that's having that sensation. And that's really an experience of the word me. So consciousness is divided into two parts. And most scientists and most people, all the philosophers, think that sensation and the consciousness is a quality that a human being possesses. But he is still part of reality. You know, even though he's a little weird, that he's possessing the ability to see something out there, and he's really not detecting the thing itself. But okay, he's representing it through an image. But fundamentally, through these sensations and through his mind, he has a knowledge of what's out there and what's in there, the me. But if you really think about this, and you really truly understand, I think they're all missing a point. Because what exists in reality are two things. That's right. One thing is called a subject, and the other thing is called an object. That's it. There are two types of entities: a subject entity, which I will define in a minute, and an object entity, which I will define in a minute. What is an object? An object is anything which does not know that it is. In other words, if you're looking at a table in front of you, you clearly have a sight of that table. You have a sensory image of that, and you could see that it exists. But does the table know that it's a table? Does the table have a sense of itself? Does it have the ability to sense reality and know things which are out there? No, not at all. So that's called an inanimate object. It is simply an object. It exists in my mind, but it doesn't exist in its mind because it has no mind. That's what it appears. So they're fundamentally based on the criteria of consciousness, two types of beings: inanimate beings, which is what? Which is all the objects in the universe, galaxies, planets, the planet Earth, and so on and so forth. All of these things, all non-living things, are totally objects. That's why, in a certain way, you're much more superior to the sun. Because as large as the sun is is some say 50 million degrees. It has heat and light that goes to you after you're 93 million miles away. So the sun, the planet, the sun, our sun, is an incredible object. But who's more significant, you or the sun? You are. Why? Because the sun has no idea that it is an object. It has no sense of itself. And it has no sense of anything outside of it. It just is. You, however, have consciousness, and that allows you to know it, the sun. So you can see the sun, and through seeing the sun, you know that it exists. So the question is, who's really superior in being? Well, from a physical standpoint, the sun is. It's much larger than you, much hotter than you, and so on and so forth. But it is not as great as you, because you know that it is. You know that there's a sun. The sun does not know that there's a sun. And that's the difference in consciousness. The consciousness of the sun doesn't exist. It has no sense of me, nor does it have a sense of you. It has no sense at all. So you may be impressed with the enormity of the galaxies, the enormity of the universe, but in actuality, the concept of consciousness is much superior. Now, what about the consciousness of plants or the consciousness of animals? They have a form of consciousness, yes, but it's not the same as a human being. Their consciousness is they know they have a certain sense of me. They do. For example, if there's a cat in front of you and you suddenly scream at it, it becomes frightened and it runs away. Well, the fact that it becomes frightened is the fact that it becomes afraid. It's threatened. Who is threatened? Well, the one who is threatened is the me that's inside the cat. So the cat does have a sense of me. He does, because it's that me which is frightened for. But I believe what a cat, that sense of me, it's not really part of the cat. It's part of the reality of the cat. The cat really belongs to reality. And even though it's not inanimate, it has a sense of consciousness in a sense, but that sense of consciousness is something that's outside of it. It has a sense of me which is outside of it, just like the person is outside, or a plant, or a tree, or food. And that sense of outside means that the cat doesn't know that it's really a cat. It cannot think like we do. And that's the difference between the consciousness of intellect and just consciousness of an animal. So the only one who has a consciousness where there's a real me inside, in other words, the sense of me is separated from the sense of outside or other. That's right. The sense of yourself is completely separated from the sense of something else outside of you. And you distinguish between the two. You distinguish the fact that you have a sensation of an outside object and that you have a sensation of the me who's having that sensation of that outside. Only a human being has that exists in two forms, me and you. So what does that say about a human being? Because a human being has a sense of itself by itself. We ask the question, what is it? You see, when you have a cat, again, is there anything unique about it? Well, there is. What's unique about it has certain qualities. It looks a certain way. It has a certain height, a certain weight. It has certain colors. It has features. It has certain qualities. But there's one quality it doesn't have. Because every cat is not different from every other cat. A cat represents a species, and all cats are exactly the same in their internal essence. They do not differ at all, whatsoever. But a human being, every human being is unlike every other human being. That's true, is unlike. Where does he differ? He differs in what that me is. He has a sense of himself called me. But what is that me? Is the me of one person the same as the me of another? The me of a cat is the same as the me of another cat. That's true. it's not unique, but the me of a person is not the same as another me. I maintain that the two me's are totally different. In fact, I maintain that the me of every single person is unique, is unlike the me of every person who was ever put on the planet Earth. Each one had a certain me, and each one senses that me in a unique way. So therefore, the human being is a totally different kind of being than anything else which exists in the universe where it lives, in the physical universe, or the world called Olama. He senses himself, and then he senses alternatively reality, which is a network composed of everything else. And the sense of me is what gives him a sense of that reality. In other words, a human being has what's called self-knowledge. What exactly is self-knowledge? That he knows himself as opposed to all of reality. He is not part of reality. He is outside of it. And he senses reality as it is. So the real question is, what is this self-knowledge? Well, the important thing about the concept of self-knowledge is that he has a certain amount of self-awareness. How does he know that he exists? How does he know that anything exists, that he exists? Because he has a sense of himself. And from that self-awareness, it's called self-awareness, the awareness, what is the awareness of? It's the awareness of himself. But that awareness is synonymous with the awareness of his existence. In other words, a human being knows that he is by himself. What is that itself? What is that? What is that core element in consciousness which is represented by the word me, and which he knows that he is? Not only that, what is a self? Well, we really don't know. Every person has a self, and that's really the sensation of his me. But what exactly is that? We really don't know. It's a core of the person. And from that core, he knows himself by himself. Now, what does this mean? What this means really is this is his existence. I'm going to say a very good Kiddush. A human being knows that he exists. How? By the sensation of me. That's it. That's how we know he exists. So in other words, his awareness has nothing to do with his senses. Even if a human being is completely separated from his senses, he still possesses a sense of me, a sense of himself. So therefore, I maintain that there's no such thing as existence. There really is no such thing as reality. The only thing that's real, as far as we are concerned, is a sense of me, the sense that I exist. And that's how I know that I exist. I know that I exist. Why? Because I am aware of the fact that I exist. Myself is an entity which undergoes an operation. It does something. What does the self do? It's aware of itself. It has an awareness, and that awareness says, I am. And where does that come from? It comes from the core of its consciousness. It comes from the word itself. So therefore, self-awareness is not simply a quality that a person possesses, which is somewhat similar to an animal. No, that self-awareness, the knowledge that he exists by being aware of himself, is what existence is. Existence fundamentally is nothing more than self-awareness. Because self-awareness, it what indicates, it tells the person that he is. Which means that the existence of a person is in a certain sense like a backpack. Everything is detected from another being that sees it in some way. But a human being knows that he is by himself. So he doesn't need anyone else to tell him that he exists. He doesn't have to participate in a process called existence. I maintain that the process of existence, which is combined with the process of essence, which is the way philosophers think of it, and the way we've always thought of it, is not true. The only thing that exists is awareness. When I'm aware, I exist. And when I'm not aware, I'm gone. So awareness is itself the process of existence. So therefore, a self, what we are, when we fundamentally look at ourselves, what are we really? And this is, I'm going to say, it's a tremendous chiddush, a tremendous thought, really. If you're speaking to another person, right, and you say to the other person, I see you, I hear you, I can touch you, and so on, I can smell you, or whatever the story is, I say that I have objective knowledge of you. I know you through my mind, but at least I know you, and I know myself through my mind. Now, I want to know who you are. That's right. I want to know what is a person, what is his interior core. So I say to the person, well, I see that you have clothes on you. You have certain items which you're kind of on top of you. Are you those items? And you say to me, no, I am not those items. I'm simply wearing those items. Okay. So I say to you, take off your clothes then, since it's not you. You take off your clothes and you're left with your underwear. And I said, well, are these items you? And so you say, no, they're not me. I'm wearing them also. So then I say to you, my apologies as I say it, take off your underwear. So now you're totally naked. And then I look at you and I say, well, what I see is you're in a body. That you're in a body. Is that you? So you say to me, no, I wear the body like I wear my clothes, except the difference is that I am connected to my body. My mind is connected to my body. It is not connected to my clothes. I say, okay, but you say that the body is not you, so I say to you, please take off your body. So then you step outside of your body. Let's say you have the ability to do that, and that's actually what we do when we die. We step outside of our body, okay? And the body's left behind as a piece of clothes, as if it was a piece of clothes. So then I say to you, well, I see you, but you're a soul. It is, I see you have a soul. So I say to you, well, is that you? Well, according to all the sages and all the people, everyone refers to a human being as fundamentally as a soul, right? They say when push comes to shove, in the bottom line, every human being has a soul. But the question, I'm not asking you what you have. Are you a soul? Is that you? And you say to me, no. Now, how do we know that's true? How do we know that the core of a person is not even a soul? He's not his clothes. He's not his body. He's not even a soul. So besides the fact that I have to ask him what he is, I say to him, how do you know that? How do you know that you are not identical with your soul? How do I know that your consciousness does not reside in your soul, since your consciousness of self-awareness tells you you exist, and it's at the core, it's inside you by yourself? How do I know that your consciousness, your mind, doesn't exist in your soul? Because it says, because we have a prayer every morning that we say. And what do we say? Neshama shenasata bi. You know, the soul that you gave me, God. That's what we have a conversation with God, and we say, you know, the soul that you gave me, shechzalta bi neshosi, that you returned the soul to me. Well, that sounds like I'm not my soul. That's a soul is something that God gives to me, and that's true. What the soul really is a lens, L-E-N-S. It's a lens. When I look, when my conscious mind, instead of being in a body, inhabits a soul. So a soul is like a body that simply inhabits, that the core of the person inhabits. And it's a lens. It allows me to see reality in a certain way. And we will discuss that at another time. But the soul is simply like a body on a different plane. So then I say to the person, well, take off your soul. If that's not you and it was given to you, take it off. Get outside of it, and suddenly you walk outside of your soul, so to speak. And then you say, this is me. Well, what happened? What did you become? So the truth of the matter is, we don't know. We have no idea of what the person is in his core outside of his body and outside of his soul. But I'll tell you what he is. We do know. We can know. And you know what he is? He is an entity called self, self, the self. What is that entity? What does it look like? Does it have a detection? Can we detect it? The answer is no. We have no idea what a self is, but we only know this. The self is the pure consciousness of the me. That being is an entity, but what is it? We don't know what it is. We've never seen a self, but we know that the self is a consciousness process, and that's the operation of the self. That's how it exists. It exists by being aware of itself. Now, what does that mean? We really don't know. But that's what the true person is. He is an entity called a self who's aware of himself because he exhibits the process called self-awareness. And self-awareness is the process of existence. And that's who you are. When push comes to shove, when you look at yourself and you say, who am I? You will go down all these levels and eventually you will reach the level of the soul. You will reach beyond the soul and you will reach the level of the self. And it is the self that goes to Olama. That's right. When we refer to Olama, the future world, which is beyond the physical universe, then we are in the spiritual world. But the spiritual world itself is not the final world, because the spiritual world is the world of souls, the world of angels, and the world with spheres. It is a world which is occupied by certain entities, souls, neshamas, angels, malachim, and energies, and hanogas, supervisory energies called spheres. That's it. But that's not the world. That's not your reality. You have a reality which is beyond everything. Your reality is a self. It's pure consciousness. Yes, it is pure consciousness. It's what has the core of the word me. Whenever you sense the me, you are sensing the me at the bottom of your core. And that me knows itself. And that's the definition of a subject. What is a subject? The subject is the self. Why? Because it knows that it is by itself. It knows the knowledge of its existence is internal to it. It's identical with it. It's part of it. It's identical to it and part of it. That's astonishing. So therefore, there is no such thing as existence itself, as a process which is separated from your entity of a body. It's separated from everything that you possess. But true existence is simply comes from your awareness of me. It comes from myself, which is in me. So that what scientists think is a quality of the human being as a body, it thinks that human beings are entities which possess self-awareness. Mazel tov. They have consciousness. Mazel tov. That's what they have. What it is, I don't know. Nobody knows what consciousness is. But I maintain that consciousness is the very way that we know ourselves. How do we know ourselves? We know ourselves through ourselves, by ourselves. It's a certain type of being which has the capability and the capacity to know that it is by itself. And this being is called a subject. That's what I mean by a subject. A subject is a being that exists through itself, through its own consciousness. It knows that it is. And that's called a subject. And any other being that knows itself because it's a part of reality or does not know itself at all, like the sun or stars or galaxies or anything else, is called, any other object, is called an object. So therefore, what exists in the universe is a subject and an object. That's it. A subject is something which knows itself by itself. It has its self-awareness. It's its own information, which is contained within its being, that it exists. The being knows that it exists. So what do we see from this? We see an amazing thought. If it's true that there are certain things called subjects which know themselves in themselves, through themselves, and entities which don't know themselves, have no idea or know themselves indirectly through reality, they're called objects. But what does that mean? If there's no such thing as existence, what does that really mean? What that really means is that the only thing which is real, the only thing that was real is called the essence, the entity, what a thing is. Because every self is a different what. Not that. It's not a that. It's not a that it is. It doesn't possess existence. It is existence. It knows itself. It knows what it is. And what is a question of essence, of an entity, of an identity. So therefore, when we say that what a human being possesses as a subject is a concept of an identity, nothing else in existence has an identity. Nothing. Only a human being. And that concept, what you called an identity, is the definition of what it is. It's an entity, and it has an identity. And what truly is an identity, I really don't know. What is the core of the person that says me? I don't know. But that's what it is. And I call that a subject. Every other entity in the universe, in creation, in not only the physical universe, but in the spiritual universe, souls, angels, spheros, energies, all of these things exist in another universe called the spiritual universe. But there's a universe of people which is beyond the physical and beyond the spiritual, and that's the entity called consciousness, pure consciousness, and that entity is called a self. It knows it exists because it knows that it exists. The existence is a knowledge that it possesses, and that knowledge comes from its awareness of itself. I am. So I am is the one statement that's said by the self. And that universe called the self is beyond the universe of spirit. That's right. And it's beyond the universe of physicality. And even though everyone thinks that it's simply a quality, I say it is not a quality of a person. It is the person. And that's why no one will ever understand it. Scientists, philosophers will never capture what that self is. Will we see that self? Will we come to know ourselves as a self? Yes. Where? In Olam Haba. And that's what God says. The self appears as an entity. Where? In the future life, in eternity. It's beyond time, beyond space, and it's beyond action. The only thing that a self can do is be aware. That's it. And in that effort, in that action, it's the greatest action of all. Because where does that awareness come from? And the truth of the matter is it comes from another subject. That's right. There's also another subject. Who is that other subject? God. God is a subject. Does God know that he exists? Of course. Does God exist? Of course. Does he know that he is? Of course. But he knows that he is, and that's how he exists. He exists also through his knowledge of himself. So therefore, God is a super subject. He's called an absolute subject. God is a self, in a certain sense, we can say. He's an entity, in a certain way, that is a pure consciousness. And therefore, he knows that he exists like we do. But God is different than us. And now we can begin to understand, to some degree, of who God is. You see, when I say I know myself, I'm using two words. The word I, and there's an action called know, which is the action of awareness. What do I know? I know an object, and I call that object myself. So in other words, when I refer to my consciousness, I'm referring to it in two words, I and myself. Now, both of these things refer to me. They both refer to me, but they're two separate words that refer to me. It's almost like there's an I, the core, which exists in a certain reality called myself, and so on. So therefore, even though I'm pure consciousness and I know myself, and my existence is myself, I'm still a duality. I'm still the number two. That's right. I'm not beyond the number two, but I'm number two. When existence is not self, but existence is a process, you actually have more than a duality. You have what's called multiplicity. If existence, the process of existence is outside of the essence, then that process can be what? It can be attached or merged with any essence. So therefore, I can exist, another person can exist, a cat can exist, a plant can exist, a tree can exist, a planet can exist, a galaxy can exist. Every entity is subject to existence. So therefore, when existence is a process which is connected to the essence of the thing, there is possibly a multiplicity. Suddenly you have something called mathematics, number. Why do we have mathematics, number? Because you can have more than one entity in the world. That's right. You have billions of stars, billions of people. You have many people. So therefore, the entity is subject to number. There's a mathematics. You can count the entities, and that's called the multiplicity of existence. If existence is a process, then entities are subject to a multiplicity. There can be many of them. But when existence is not a process, when existence is the entity itself, you cannot have a multiplicity. You can only have that entity, because the existence of that entity is similar, is connected only to that entity. Existence is not a public form. It's not something which is public, which is shared by anything. When existence is a process, it's like a corporation. There could be many stockholders that own a corporation. But if existence is unique to one person through its self-awareness, it's not a public item. And therefore, there can only be one of them. There cannot be any more than them. So therefore, when it comes to the Zulosoi, who is a self, there can only be one Zulosoi. That's right. There can only be one of them, because that one has its own awareness of itself, and its existence belongs to itself. It's part of itself, even though it's separated from self. There's what's called a self, which has awareness, its existence. So there's like a duality in terms of process, but in one being, because it has an identity. But fundamentally, the existence of a self is its own existence. It's inside of it. It sees itself through its awareness. So therefore, there can only exist one entity. And that's why it says that the fundamental nature of humanity is one. Humanity is really started from Adam Rishon, the first man, and it never departed from Adam Rishon. Where did humanity come from? Well, we say humanity had children. But Adam Rishon, the children of Adam Rishon before the State, were not individuals. They were extensions of him. They were not real people, and I will explain that some other time. Adam Rishon was the only person that was ever created, and he is the only person that is created. Humanity was made from Adam Rishon. When he started having children, those children turned out to be separate from him. They were separate selves. Why? Because Adam Rishon, the soul of Adam, or the soul, I may say, the self of Adam, was once composed of what? Of the soul of every person that ever existed on the planet Earth. Throughout human history, since the first man, every person that showed up was another person. But he used to be a fragment of the original soul of Adam. That's right. That's what the Kabbalah says. So Adam Rishon, the first man, is what's called a superorganism. There is nothing outside of Adam. Adam Rishon, Koydem Achet, before the sin. There was no such thing as a human being that was outside of that person, because that person was its only self. It existed by itself. Existence was what it contained itself. It had a certain identity, and there was never created another identity. All the people that we surround are identities which come from him. They are fragments, because the original soul of Adam, or the original self, was fragmented in a sense, but they all remained as part of themselves. That's why in Olama we will know every soul that ever existed. Every soul. Whether it's Jewish, not Jewish, it doesn't make a difference. Every soul which remains in Olam Haba, we will be intimately connected to, because it was once a piece of ourself. And we are also a piece of Adam Rishon. You think that Adam Rishon died 5,783 years ago. No. The Adam Rishon, that was the individual, the totality of mankind, which was once Adam Rishon, the first man, existed. But Idealism exists as a part of each and every one of us. He is in us. He did not truly disappear. And if we could sense ourselves, we would also be able to sense the concept of totality, which was Idealism before the sin. Yes, we can all feel that. We can feel that one man that used to be all. We can feel that. Because we are still part of Idealism, although we are individuated. In a certain sense, our sense of self is individuated from the first man. But it is still a fragment of the first man. And Idealism himself does not exist. He no longer exists because he was fragmented. Idealism exists in the terms of billions of humans. So he does not have the consciousness of one man. No, that disappeared. But the consciousness of all people together as a totality was the same consciousness as Adam had himself. So therefore we see something astonishing about a subject. You cannot have more than one subject. God could not create in a certain way, kaviyachol, more than one subject, because the existence is the subject. His awareness is himself. That's a self. His awareness, his existence, his knowledge. It's all the same thing. It's all but it's the same thing invested in two things, the self and his awareness. There's two things that we see. So that means that the mathematics of the Zulosoi is the number two, but not more than two. Every Zulosoi is composed of a self, which is aware, and the action of his awareness. So there are two actions going on. There's a self and its awareness. That's it. There is nothing else. Nothing else. And that's what a subject is. Now, where does he come from? Well, he comes from God. But did God create him? No. God never created the human being. It's shocking. Why? Because you cannot create a subject. Because the definition of a subject is somebody who knows he exists in his core through his identity by himself. You cannot create an entity called by himself. By himself automatically means that that which is in himself is outside of any other entity. You cannot create that. You cannot create something called by himself. So how did God create man? He didn't create him, he derived him. The word is derived. To derive means to come from something else. So God said, I will create, I don't want to use the word create, but I will form you from me. I am God. And from my sense of self, I am creating you. So I'm not really a me, you. You're not me, and I'm not the you of me. I'm really part of me. I'm the inner me of you. I am you. You see it. But you are not me, because you have your own uniqueness. And it seems to be that you're almost outside of me, but you're not really. So what I have taken from me, I have dipped into myself, so to speak, and I have pulled out of it another consciousness, another self that now knows itself by itself. This is a subject. A subject cannot be created. It is part of God. It is derived from God, but it is not God. Now the question is, wait a minute, if this is who I am, if I was never created, I was formed from God himself, and that's why it says, let us make man in our image, and God is referring to what? To himself with an identity. So therefore, so if he's doing that, so what do we mean, how did I come from God? So then who is God? Well, that God is not that, because the Zulosoi has a mathematics of the number two. There are at least two events in the Zulosoi, the self and its action of awareness, because he knows himself by himself. But the mathematics of God is beyond number two. It's the number one. It's not even the number one. Because this, I'll say what it is. I will describe God, but I cannot understand at all what I am talking about. So what I'm going to say this. The word self, which is the being that has that core identity, and the word awareness or existence or knowledge, which is all three are the same thing. And the self, it's not they are merged. They are the same thing. That means that as far as God is concerned, there's no such thing as a self outside of an awareness. There's no such thing as self-awareness. No such thing. But what it is, that to be a self, to be a subject, is to be identical to, literally the same thing as to be an awareness. Now, what does that mean, a self and awareness? There's the two words. There's a mathematics of two. No, with God, there's a mathematics of one, and it's not even one, because it cannot be duplicated. There's nothing that can duplicate God, because the type of being that God is, who is a self that's aware of himself, and both of these are the same thing, means that there is no such thing as a unity. He's not even, you can't even describe him by the number one. The two are so merged that they are the same thing. That's all I can say. They are the same thing. So there's not even a number one. The truth is, when we say Shema Yisrael, hear, O God, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, God is our God, He is one. That is not true. God is not one. Because the way the number one that we understand implies that there's a possibility to be the number two, and the number three, and the number four. One is the beginning of the sequence of numbers. There's no such thing as only the number one. It's possible that there's only one item, yes, in the world. It's possible that one item exists, yes. But it also is possible to be two, but there just isn't two. So in the 16th century, when there was a tape recorder, for example, and if I would say to you, the tape recorder was created in the 16th century, how many tape recorders are there in the world? Well, you would say to me, there's only one. But does that mean there cannot be another tape recorder? No, there can be, but there just isn't. So the number one implies something that is, but doesn't have to only be. It can also be the number two or three or four. But God, in terms of being exactly identical with the awareness and the essence, the awareness and the essence, or the awareness and his and the sense of self, are exactly both are the same. There is no number one, because there cannot be a number two. But that's the best that we can say. So God says to us, I give you permission to say that I am one. But don't think that that's my truth. It is not. I am not two, three, and I am not one. I am beyond number. There is no mathematics that applies to me. And in a certain sense, there is a mathematics of only the number one that applies to a Zolossoi, because there cannot be two Zolossois. There cannot be two selves that know themselves by himself. That's only possessed by one. And that's very difficult to understand. But that's what it is, and so on. So therefore we see that the subject, a human being, is not a normal being. The world did not start out with subjects, and so on. It was never created. It can only be derived from another subject. So now we're seeing another truth of this thing. So first of all, you have to understand this concept, that we're not talking about existence and non-existence, and that the world comes from non-existence. We're not talking about that. We're talking about there was always existence. And therefore, why? Because existence is derived from an entity. It doesn't come before an entity. It's not that you have existence as a process, and that's attached to an essence, and suddenly that essence becomes an entity and exists. That's not true. What it is that the world is composed of, the world or anything called reality is composed of an entity. The entity is before existence. The existence of the entity lies within the entity. It's not outside of it, because it's not a process which is merged with the entity. So in other words, what the world really started out with is a being who exists, and that's God. Now you think that God is abnormal. In other words, you are normal, you're a person, and people are normal. It's what should be. God is a deviation from the norm. That's what it appears. He's like super, and he's a deviation, because there's only one of him. But humans are normal. But that's mistaken. The only normal entity that ever exists is God, because that's the only normal entity that can be. Existence cannot be a process outside of an entity. It can only be a process which is known through the awareness of the entity. So existence does not exist outside. It exists only inside the entity through its identity. And that's the only thing. That means that, and the term entity or essence precedes the term existence. And that the term existence does not exist. There's no such thing as a process called existence. There's something called a subject, which knows itself by itself. And there's something called an object, which doesn't know itself by itself, because it does not have an itself. That's it. And the itself entities were created. Now that was created, because that never existed before, because it doesn't have the ability to exist, because it doesn't have the ability to be aware, so it was never here. So that was created, yesh me'ayim, from nothing. But a subject did exist. It exists because that is what it is. It is existence. It has an identity, which is by itself. Now God is by itself in a similar way, but God is not simply a subject. God is an absolute subject. His self and his awareness of himself are so close to each other. They're not even close. They are exactly equal to themselves. They are each other in such a unity that we cannot have a concept of what it is. So therefore, the only difference between us and God is an absolute subject and we are a relative subject. We are a subject too, because we have our existence through ourselves, in our own awareness. We have self-knowledge. And therefore, we know ourselves that we exist by ourselves. And we do exist. But the concept of self and the concept of awareness is a duality. They're separate. In a certain sense, we have a slight outside. Who is the outside? We are. We are, I am myself. Those two words, I means the self itself. Myself refers to the self itself, but it refers to it in two ways. So therefore, there's a slight mirroring, a slight reflection of a subject and reality. Yes, that's what the Zulasa has. God has no subject and no reality. There's nothing, there's no distinction between the self and its knowledge of itself through awareness. None. And we cannot comprehend that. That is an absolute subject, but you can comprehend, because there's a slight taste of reality. I know myself. Me, know myself in reality. There's a slight recognition that I am and reality is. There's I, and I exist in reality. I'm part of a network that contains who or what? Nothing. But it's a kind of the possibility of a network. I exist in a network called myself. And it's I who exists in the domain of myself. But I am a dual figure. God is absolutely one. And we have no comprehension of what that is at all. Not only is there no such thing as existence, because existence comes from the entity of self. Existence is not merged with self to allow it to exist. It comes from the entity of self. It's a subject, and it was always here because it was always aware. And since it's always aware, it always exists. And therefore, it has to be derived from God himself. But God is not a Zulatsoi. That's why the Zulatsoi is called accept. When you said everything is good except this, the word Zulas means accept. Because Zulas implies an outside, that there's two entities. There's one entity and there's something outside of himself. That's what the word Zulas. Because Zulas implies, it's not only that in certain ones he is outside of God, because God says, I am you, but you, since you have your own identity, is somewhat outside of me. No, the word Zulas is even deeper. The reason why we are called a Zulas, an exception, we are called an outside, because in a certain sense, we are the first beings, entities, which have the experience not only of me, but not me. Yes, not me, in a certain sense, because myself is the aspect of a reality outside of me, and me is the aspect of who I am inside of that reality. It's very difficult to understand concepts at this level. This is extremely abstract. I understand this. And and it's very hard to really picture it. It may take a long time to understand what I'm saying. But this is a fundamental principle. You see it. God is the norm. He is the norm. He is what has to exist. In other words, if you are in existence, if you exist, or I should say, if you are manifest, if that's what you do, in the sense that your being is manifest and you exist, and the first type of being that's possible in that way is God. Because that's what existence is. It's awareness, and it's identical to awareness, and that's God. That's why he's so unique, so powerful, and so on and so forth. And the second thing which exists is we who are formed of God. We are also subject. We know we exist through our awareness of ourself, because we have a self. But to some degree, our awareness and the one who does the awareness, the self, are somewhat outside of each other. So there's a beginning of reality called reality, and that's the only reality that was ever created. You have to know something very important, which is a little frightening to people who, from a psychological standpoint, have some problems with their self-identity. There's only one thing that God made. One, nothing else. The Zulasoi. God created the Zulasoi. This is the most perfect replication of God. It's the most perfect demus. It's like God, and it's not God, because that's what David HaMelech says when he says, man is slightly less than God. What does he mean? What he means that man possesses the same quality that God possesses, except God has this quality in an absolute thing, which is normal, and this is what's supposed to be, and he has this in an abnormal way. He's a deviation. Man is a deviation from the norm. This is what I'm saying. Man is a deviation from the norm. The norm is when you exist like God. You are your awareness. The self and the awareness are the same thing, no difference, no distinction, no differentiation. And that's what's normal. That deserves to exist. That can exist eternally, because in that existence there is no time. There's no past, present, or future, because nothing changes. God does not change. The only thing that God really possesses in absolute measure is existence. And we will go into that at another point in time. We are exceptions. We are deviations from that, in the sense that we also exist through our awareness. And we are our awareness in terms of the best we can say is, I am myself. I and the word myself do not become one word. They always remain two words. And therefore we are simply relative subjects. It's here. And then finally, so if that's all that exists, that's all that God created, where did everything come from? It came from God, and it comes to us. We create, in a certain sense, manufacture the complete awareness of everything else. Because nothing exists outside of our mind. Nothing. Does something exist? Not exist? We have no idea. We cannot detect something which is outside of our consciousness. So therefore, we don't know if it exists, but God tells us it exists. It exists in our mind, and this is called Olam Hazeh. The Olam Hazeh is simply an existence of objects, of something called reality, which is a whole network of many, many things which exist, a multiplicity of entities. But all these entities do not have true consciousness like we have, like the subject. So the only thing that God ever made really was us. Everything else comes from him and from us, through us. We will never truly detect it directly, only indirectly. And that's Olam Haba. The reason why the Gemara says, Ayin lo rasa, no eye has seen Olam Haba, is not because it can be seen or can't be seen. Olam Haba cannot be seen. It's not subject to sight. The only thing you will know in Olam Haba is that you exist. You are in touch with your essence, with your self, with your entity of self. And you know that you exist because you are aware. And in that existence, there is a certain feeling of incredible ecstasy, because you may be thinking, well, who wants that existence? I don't want that existence of consciousness itself. How can I enjoy myself? How can I be happy? In Olam Haba, you will not be happy. There's no such thing as happiness. You know what you're going to have in Olam Haba? Because in a certain way, you are similar to God. You have a certain similarity, and the similarity to God is called the Demusa Adam. The Demusa Adam, which means the form of man, refers to a human being. And the Musa Adam has a certain thing where God says, Kidmusenu. God simply refers to himself in that Demus itself. Of course, he's absolute, so he's outside of that Demus. But something which has a similarity to him has this Demus of God. He is a subject. He knows himself by himself. He is a self and was derived from God. He was not created. And this is who he is, and this is what he is. And Olam Haba, therefore, is the place where there is no happiness. There is no pleasure. Pleasure, the concept of pleasure and the concept of happiness and the concept of power only exists in the physical world. It exists in the physical world so that we can massacre the problem of Nam Sufa, which is a fundamental issue that he created the physical universe. And I will speak about that at another time. So what do we feel? What can we experience in Olam Haba? A word that has 3 letters. Joy. Joy. We will be in a state of ecstasy, not because of something we did, not because of something we produced. No, we will be in ecstasy because who we are. The ecstasy emanates from our being, just like our existence emanates from our being as an entity. When you are that kind of an entity, when you are the entity of a subject, then you possess and you experience incredible joy. If God allowed you to experience the joy of Olam Haba for 1 minute, that's it. If God suddenly took you and said, I'm going to let you see what Olam Haba is like. I'm going to let you experience not your body, not your soul, but I'm going to let you experience yourself in this state of perfect awareness. Then you know what? You will have joy. And I'm going to let you experience this for 1 minute, okay? So suddenly he gives you the ability to experience it. You know what, suddenly you've read? You have a joy which is so awesome, which is so incredible, because on some level you are derived from the most unique being that ever and will ever exist, God. And that joy and that joy of your being is so incredible that you cannot go back to normal life. You will say to God, I've had it. I can't go back. After experiencing the joy of being like you in a certain way, in terms of having that knowledge of myself, that way I know that I exist, is so stupendous, so awesome. I cannot live in a physical universe. I cannot be separated from that joy. For me to be separated from that joy is to be like dead. I cannot go back to physical. Not only that, I can't even go back to spiritual. I cannot go back and be a soul. I cannot go back and see an angel. It's useless. I am far beyond all of these existences. I can be a soul. I can only be the soul called the Yechida. The Yechida is the name of the soul that you will possess in Olam Haba. And it's not really a soul. The Yechida is different than all other pieces of the soul, than the Neshama. The Neshama is more of a soul that's like a lens. It allows you to see reality and existence in a certain way. The Yechida is that allows you to see yourself, not something else, but yourself in the way you actually are. And that's the name of the only soul that you will have. It's only a homonym. It's really not a soul at all, but it's called a soul. It's called a neshama, but only as a homonym. Just as it has the same word, but it's a different meaning. So you will say, I cannot go back to the spiritual world to become an neshama, and I cannot go back to the physical world and become a body. It's over. That's the way you will feel. And that's what God means when he says that. The Gemara means when it says, I know you also. No eye has ever seen the experience or ever felt the experience of Olam Haba. That's how superior it is. So I realize that everything that I've said today is somewhat difficult to understand. It's a complete revolution in terms of what a person is. But a person is really the Son of God. That's what a person is. Because he's the closest to God that anything has ever been. And this is what is true and what a thing. So again, this is what I say, and I hope you can understand it. You'll have to review this year many times to truly get the grips of what I'm talking about, because only then you'll ever understand it. And the bracha that I give everyone who listens to this year is that God should allow a person to touch this concept and experience this concept. And that's the beginning of really what it's all about. Okay. Any questions?
Shimon, thank you.
Very yes, amazing. So I assume that what you're saying is the lenses go away in Olam Haba.
Yeah, there's no lenses in Olam Haba. There's only sight. There's only perception or experiencing through yourself. You don't need a lens.
Because I see that. I was under the impression, I forget whether that the Ramchal says that, both the body and soul. So we're taking it to another level now, because it's
a new level. The body and soul are two different types. They're two different perceptions of reality. The soul and the body are two different lenses. The soul sees everything connected, and the body sees everything as separated. When you're in the universe of the body or the physical, every entity is separate from another. When you are in the body of a soul, every entity is really connected. So therefore, in the spiritual world, it takes on the structure of an organism, whereas on the physical world, the structure is like a individuation. The concept of individuation, as it applies to entities, is complete only in the physical world. There is no individuation other than the subjects and fragments, but there's no individuation. Everything is connected in the spiritual universe, everything, and you see the connection of everything through the connection of all souls. But when you become an entity, the only reason why you can see the connection of everything and everything, because in the end we are all fragments of Adam Rishon. And since we are all fragments of the totality of what Adam, the first man, was, we have a sense that we are related. And the reason why, let me say one more thing. Why is God so obsessed with the Achdus of Klal Yisrael? Why does God say we have to act like a unified people? We have to act like a club where everyone knows everyone else. Why? It's not because he wants us to behave ourselves and be nice to another person. God is simply saying, because that's who you are. You don't realize it, but in the physical universe, you think that you are separated. But really, you are all part of the one consciousness that I started out with. Who is that consciousness? Adam Rishon Kodim Achet. You are part of one consciousness. Therefore, you are all simply segments of the same being. That's why the most important mitzvah bein Adam v'chavero is Achdus. And when Klal Yisrael refuses to obey the rule of Achdus, when Klal Yisrael sees each other as higher or lower or more or more superior or inferior, you are disturbing the very nature of what a human being is. Human beings are one being in essence. And that's it.
Shimon, can I ask you aside? One of the kudus you said, and there's a lot to absorb here, but I'm just, at the end, just recently you said that Olam Haba is an experience of joy, not pleasure or happiness. Yes. What does that mean? What does that mean more? Why joy more than that? What's unique about joy that pleasure and happiness don't have? What's the
definition? There are three words: joy, happiness, and pleasure. And they fundamentally have different definitions. Happiness is when you're in a state of contentment. All your needs are filled. So then fundamentally, since every need that you possess and what you acquire is fulfilled, you are happy because you don't need anything else. That's happiness. Pleasure is something else. Pleasure is not only it satisfies the need, but it empowers your being. So for example, when you're eating a very good meal, it's not the fact that you're satisfying your need of energy. You know, that you need energy, you have to need food, and the body has to consume energy. That's not it. It's that while you're doing that action, you actually experience an empowerment in the self. You feel somehow larger than yourself. You feel pleasure. You feel good. You feel like something tastes great. Like when something tastes good. Wow, I really like that taste. It's a certain satisfaction that includes an experience, not of needs of happiness, but an experience of pleasure. Joy is something totally different. Joy is when you experience the self, when you experience your true inner reality called the self. And we will not be zocher to joy until Olam Haba, when we truly experience our sense of self and we become godly. We have always been godly. The human being is unlike everything that was ever created, because the human being was not created by God. The human being was formed, derived from God. So when you sense that self that was formed and derived from God, and you see who you are, you will have a tremendous sense of joy that emanates from your entity, from your being, not from your existence, and so on. So therefore we see the word joy, happiness, and pleasure are three different types of feelings, and so on. And that's what we will...
The other are components of reality that experience through reality?
Yes, they're components of physical reality. They're really components. And also the components of happiness is also needed in the spirit universe. Why? Because in the spirit universe, we have to feed, we have to derive energy, Kedusha. When we derive the Kedusha that comes from God, we feel happiness, we feel content, because we have the need to absorb Kedusha. Pleasure is really only something you really experience in a certain extent in the physical universe. In a certain sense, you get a type of pleasure in the spiritual universe because you have what's called an empowerment in your existence. When you're a soul and you're being fed Kedusha, you feel a certain empowerment, but it's still a certain empowerment outside of your own being. It's an addition to your own being, but there's a certain sense. But joy you will not truly experience until what? Yeah, you know what? When you experience joy, when does a human being experience joy? And not only that, those are the only two times in a human being's life that he actually celebrates. He makes an open celebration when something happens. Only with two experiences does he make a celebration. And you know what that is? And that's because of joy. Joy is so profound that there's only two times when a human being is physical that he experiences a kind of joy, because it's so profound. And he makes a celebration. Do you know when that is? What?
Getting married.
Getting married and
the bris milah.
Yes, and having children. Why? Because there's something about these two events. When you get married, you are uniting with your other soul. Because in a certain way, not exactly, but in a certain way, your wife or the one you couple with, is a certain way is another part of you, and the joy is the joy of reunification. To reunify that to that which is once a part of you produces joy, and that's why you make a simcha. When you get married, there's a tremendous celebration, and when you have a child, there's a tremendous celebration. Why? Because when you produce the extension of a child from you, or when you reunite with a woman who is actually your other half, you feel, or at least should be your other half in certain ways, you feel a certain joy. But other than that, you don't make a celebration really. And that's what it is. So joy is really something which is confined to Olam Haba, and only in certain circumstances it's confined to hear something. There's only one other type of joy that you can experience in Olam Hazeh, and it's the You know what that joy is? There's one other joy, and only a tzaddik really feels that joy. You know what that is?
Dveikus?
Who said that?
Trust.
Who?
Trust.
Yes, dveikus. Dveikus is when you experience God not as a thought and not as a feeling. You experience God as a presence. Now, that's very few people experience. Only a true tzaddik, who's at the true kedusha, in certain ways, has that level of experience of God himself. That when he experiences God, it's unlike anything which any human experiences God. Most people experience God as a thought. You know what I mean? As a thought or as a feeling. But they don't feel God as a presence. And when you feel God as a presence through dveikus, by doing mitzvahs and being humble, it is a tremendous joy that's given to you. But that's something which is really shared by very few people, and you really have to work on it. But that's the other thing. So that also produces joy. But happiness and pleasure are physical terms, and you can experience it in life if you have, everything you need, and you experience a certain empowerment which the body gives you, which is a pleasure because it has a certain empowerment when it experiences certain pleasures.
Shimon, so you're saying a very nice get. You're saying joy is the experience of yichud itself.
Yes, the yichud with yourself.
Wow, very nice tight. Wow.
So when the philosophers of old, like Socrates, said, what's the most important thing that a person should do? Know thyself. I forgot how to say that in Latin. Know thyself. Why? What does that mean, know thyself? Because somehow Socrates knew that the greatest joy that a person can have when he truly understands what kind of entity he is. That's very difficult. Most people do not know themselves. They only know certain feelings that they have, fears, happiness, certain types of feelings, but they don't know who they are. You see it. But the true joy comes from that kind of information. Know thyself. And when you know yourself, everything else is secondary.